Now, despite being able to restructure only $1.6 billion out of the more than $30 billion external debt, Ghana really still expects a very wonderful deal from the IMF. And this is supposed to get the approval of some $3 billion support. And the period we are so clear on is latest by May. Now, tonight, we will subject this particular thorough review, the request. A reality check is going to be put on the finance minister's indicative pitch with the assurance to the investor community of Ghana's commitment to restoring economic stability through effective implementation of the support program. After this break, we should be able to get you to understand that, because he has been saying that he hopes the IMF will finally give us the approval latest by May. We first pitched March, but it appears March cannot happen because we're already in April anyway. I have put together the very best of the people with a man who's been sitting very close to the finance minister and the big boss at the IMF in Washington, George Yafe, joining us. And also joining us from Washington is the current chairman of the Finance Committee of Parliament and the former deputy minister in that Ministry of Finance himself. But in studio is a man of distinguished honor when it comes to economics and finance in this country, Professor Lord Mensah from the University of Ghana Business School. Prof, you're welcome.
Thank you.
So tonight on the business edition of PM Express, the crux of our engagement is simple. The bigger question remains, can we secure the deal by the month that we've been talking about? That's the month of May, as we have made a subsequent change to that. Prof, I'll come to you, but permit me to go to Washington where George Rafi will be joining us for a brief understanding. Since morning, George, you've been giving us regular and consistent updates on what's been happening there and the assurances that Ghana and our wonderful pitch is supposed to deliver on the ground. As a summary of what has happened the entire day, this question should really put it to rest. Are we certain that May is going to be the final deadline we are giving for an IMF deal?
Well, Raymond, I would look at more of the second quarter. The economists will always say that all other things being equal and holding all these conditions constant. Again, and you have an examiner and a lecturer in studio with you. And when you have the IMF MD that is supposed to act as an examiner, saying that as soon as the creditors approve of Ghana's program, we will swiftly move to approve Ghana's program. Where you have an actor like the World Bank saying that, listen, we need to help Ghana get a program. When you have a U.S. Treasury Secretary saying that, Janet Yellen saying that, creditors move fast and deal with Ghana and Zambia's issue. And I've said that I stand to be educated following the fund. I haven't had a situation where a country is requesting for a program and you have the IMF MD, you have all these multilateral partners giving that indication that we want to help you. The IMF MD in a press briefing just a while ago here in DC, for instance, made a very interesting statement, and I know a very controversial one that people would disagree with her.
Okay.
And she still echoed her stance or point that she's insistent that she believes that the current challenge that Ghana is going through cannot solely be placed on a domestic challenge as in how Ghana has managed the economy, but she still insists that externalities have played into the current challenge. And looking at Ghana's track record in terms of how Ghana has performed over the years, going on the international market, raising funds. I mean, the star boy of Africa. And if Ghana is down now, it is not fair to leave Ghana to crumble, but they would move fast to help Ghana to recover. And for instance, she talked about the fact that the external creditors or the creditors will meet next week and that they are supposed to make some progress on that one. And that as soon as the program comes to them, they are going to approve Ghana's program. So it tells you, you hear all these things and you hear that, but the condition was that as soon as we close that deal with the creditors, and you get when you speak to people off record, you get the understanding that we want to help Ghana, but they also must put in place the necessary structural reforms that 4 years from now, 5 years from now, they wouldn't be rushing to the IMF again. So when you hear all these things, and I'll just put government somewhere because as a journalist, you're trying your best to be independent-minded and all those things. Raymond, I'll tell you, I've engaged some of these actors off record. And I struggle sometimes being a Ghanaian and being a journalist and how to report on some of these issues. You get the word going through all these partners that we want to help Ghana come out of this current crisis. So, May, June, maybe it is today for me, the scripts are changing based on what the MD again echoed at the press conference, what I heard from some of the multilaterals I've engaged, some of these private investors. And also, I remember that I had an engagement with one official who indirectly might be connected to government. And one word he uses, that George, after our engagement today, I am more optimistic than ever. This person was very less optimistic, but he says, George, today, I am more optimistic than ever about us getting the program soon.
Now, I'll come to because of course, this is privileged communication and privileged information, which is really not what many people who are watching from the outside may be privileged to have actually heard you say. These engagements, are they any different from what we were told prior to the March deadline being postponed one way or the other? We know that before the March deadline, half of the country was quite optimistic, especially the leadership, including the president.
Raymond, anytime the president comes out, now I'll be very blunt, talk about us getting a program in March. The question I asked myself was that, okay, so who is briefing the president? I mean, okay. Raymond, those who matter in this space knew that the end of Q1 was not possible. Again, read all the EIU reports and all the rest. And some say that, why is the city fairly stable? You can talk about demand and all those things, but those who matter in this space know when Ghana is going to get the program. I'm telling you, when you engage some of them in DC, sometimes they even have more data on Ghana than Raymond, you and I.
Oh, I see.
What is happening in Ghana. I'm confessing that some of the things that are being told here, I'm surprised myself, Raymond. So anybody who told you that Ghana is going to get its board program approved, when we're still lingering on approving, for instance, the revenue measures, zero financing, getting the financing assurance, it was not possible. IMF is committed to fast-track the program, but it won't be a blank check. It will come with certain structural commitment being undertaken, even though they are willing to help us. So anybody who told you that we're going to get a program approved by the board, when all these preconditions hasn't been met, it was never possible. Q2 ending before middle from my engagement, unless something happened. Now, listen, Raymond, another critical thing. The G24 meeting happened today. There was an engagement today. They had a press briefing, and the leader said that China has now given them the commitment that they are willing to fast-track discussions or negotiations on Ghana and Zambia. I hadn't heard this than 2 months ago. This is, for me, is interesting to me. So, again, just like what I'm saying, I'm quoting one official who has been less optimistic, saying that, George, after our meetings and everything today, I am more optimistic that we are going to make some strong progress than ever before.
China was our biggest headache, weren't they?
They were. And Raymond, listen to the concerns that they've raised. Listen, China Exim Bank, some of the Chinese institutions, they are also multilaterals. The argument was that, listen, we also want the IMF to come on board and the World Bank when you talk about debt cancellation. It is not fair. For instance, China is also saying in that committee meeting that they had, that is the Paris Club meeting, that, listen, some of these debts are owed to China Exim Bank. So how do you classify that as a state debt? So all these things were lingering on. So if they have given this commitment to G24 that they are now committed to fast-track discussions, and don't forget what the board is looking for, Raymond. They are just looking for financing assurance, not conclusion of negotiations.
Okay. Now, I mean, I'll come back to you, but I'm sure many people in this country who might not have heard the finance minister will benefit from your brief summary of what our finance minister has been saying in connection with all of these. So if you just sum it up from the beginning.
There was an investor engagement today, and it's more of the commitment that, again, in one breath, the plea that, listen, accept our apologies, accept our plea, we are in a challenge to come on board. But also you get that signal that, listen, we are committed to taking those tough decisions to turn things around. So in terms of the outlook, you are sure that those things you're looking for, those fiscal adjustments, those revenue measures that need to be taken, those commitments in plugging the loopholes, wage bill, they are going to do it.
There is word going around that he hinted at some second tier or second round of debt restructuring in this country, as in domestic debt restructuring. That can be dismissed, right?
I don't know about retail or institutional investors, but don't forget there was something still being worked out with the pension funds. There was something still being worked out with this, the utility providers in terms of the private thing. That has not been touched yet. So again, Raymond, and I will tell you that anybody who matters knew that there's still something to be done in that space. So you are not surprised with some of the things that are coming up. Again, I said that those who really know and have the data knew that there was a decision to be taken when it comes to the IPPs and when it comes to the pension funds, what should be done with it as well. Maybe it won't be in the form that has been done with the first round, but another form.
Okay, now I sure should be able to come back to you, but so for of you are watching, I'm sure this is the latest update you can get on what's happening. George bringing us some confidence from Washington that the close is looking clearer by the day, and we are likely to secure the IMF deal in the second quarter. Let me then bounce it off the people who sit in Ghana and still have a proper appreciation of these matters. Prof, I mean, of course, some are optimistic, and there's a lot of information George saying about what has been happening on the ground. The people who are engaging and say, well, we are getting somewhere with these engagements. Then the other point, China appears to be caving in now coming on the table and helping us out. They were, many people have said, our biggest headache. And now they are really coming back to the table. Is there hope? Is this second quarter hope possible? And if it's not possible, what are the dangers in going that path?
Yeah, that's a very good question to ask. I mean, at this moment, we need the debt restructuring, no doubt about that, as far as the external debt is concerned. But you see, we have, underplayed the complexity of our external creditors and how they stand. We look at the geographic, locations of these external creditors. We're looking at some of the conditions they gave us and how diverse they are.
Okay.
Very, very important. What we need now as a country is what we call creditor coordination. Creditor coordination, very, very important to ensure that information about Ghana, information about negotiations are equal in front of all our creditors. Very, very important. And I'm anticipating that the spring meeting will provide that platform for which, our officers will meet these creditors on, one-on-one, meet them together, talking about the Paris Club, looking at the commercial lenders from the Eurobond market, and then also the Chinese bloc.
Okay.
Now, you see, if you take the history of sovereign lending, it will give you a fair idea that China is quite new when it comes to sovereign lending. For the Western side, and then the Paris, bloc, with their experience, and then the happenings in Argentina, Greece, you can name those countries that have, gone through, default, and before default there was restructuring attempt. In that regard, you will come to understand that for the Paris Club, there's not much of a problem. Even though when you talk about sovereign debt restructuring framework, we don't have it globally. There's no guidelines as to how debt are supposed to be. What we were doing.
The approaches are sometimes different.
Exactly, different. So, China at one block, the Paris Club is looking at, fine. If we give Ghana that kind of debt relief, they'll use the money to pay China. And China is also sitting somewhere looking at, okay, fine. If we go in to provide the debt relief, the monies will be used to pay, this Paris, club countries. So effectively, there's this kind of, back and forth as far as the minds of what the creditor space is concerned. And that is why I mentioned earlier that we need that kind of creditor coordination to ensure that they all come at the same level when it comes to, information about how we want to go about, this, debt restructuring.
They call it sometimes information asymmetry in other platforms.
Of course, it's the same principle.
It's the same principle.
Same principle.
Yeah. Okay, now, but there's the grouping that still thinks that, see, no matter what we do, this is the period we need to get it sorted out. We are finished with the first quarter of this year. We are actually in the second quarter. It makes sense to conclude this early enough so that we know where we are going from here. Inflation is improving.
Yes.
We're told, the expectation of the IMF is that the deficit situation will also improve along the line.
Sure.
How much is reliant on everything that we have discussed, everything that we have been dealing with in the last few months, even from last year? How much is reliant on having an IMF deal and proceeding with it? If we don't get in the second quarter, what's the risk?
Well, there is risk, but it depends on how we position the country.
Okay.
You see, a country that owes, or let's come to our homes.
Yeah.
Let's make it simple. Let's assume that you owe and the bank is chasing you. What do? Is there a time to think about buying a car? Is there a time to think about buying, things that are not pressing so much in your life? I don't think so. So we've taken the initiative. You realize that positioning ourselves conservatively this year, there seems to be that kind of dividend that is coming out of it. Inflation has started coming down. We're looking at, interest rate also coming down. And, the buying of the investor community to restructure our debt, even to the 80%, of our GDP as a target, being able to meet it is a good signal. So for me, 80% of the debt, for me, it's a good signal. In the end, if you look at this holistically, you realize that Ghana gradually has come to a realization of an economy that got heated, right? For which, at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we position ourselves to make sure that, the heat comes down. And that is what we are experiencing now. Inflation has started coming down, build up of, even though you can see that kind of sluggishness when it comes to economic activities. But all these things are things that, really are things that we can say we've come to a realization when it comes to, this economy.
Now, the understanding that most people would have about the current situation is that, well, we are still facing some challenges even today, and that we will need to fast-pace all of these arrangements before we can settle in properly. There's also the group that thinks that even if the second quarter is the most feasible time to do this, a lot will be dependent on how government of Ghana proceeds from here. Have we done things right, at least from the beginning of this year, from the people we have spoken to, from the engagements we have done so far, Paris, China, and the people we've even asked to actually plead on our behalf? Have we done things right up to this point?
We have been in the process. Remember, to engage your creditor, it's not just a day's job.
Yeah.
I know, and sometimes I ask myself that, have we as a country thought of, the cost of default and possibly the cost of, restructuring? It could be that the cost of restructuring will be more than the cost of default. So why don't we allow ourselves to default, to get defaulted, and then see the consequence of it? Countries have gone through that.
But it doesn't look, it's not something that anybody would want.
Exactly.
On the face of it.
Exactly.
It sounds like that's the worst that can ever happen.
Oh, yeah, of course. We're doing our best. The engagement has been going on. If you look at the finance minister's presentation to the IMF, clearly it gives you the signal that there has been talks going on.
Yeah.
But then the talks are on individual creditor space. So we've engaged the Paris Club. We are talking to them. We're talking to the Chinese. Eurobonds, commercial lenders have formed committees that we are engaging them. All these things are things happening. But the Paris Club, do they really understand our engagement with China? What came out of the meeting? Do they really understand the Eurobond?
That's the coordination you referenced earlier.
Coordination is very, very important.
Permit me to bring in the chairman of the Finance Committee in Ghana's Parliament, who we understand is also attending these spring meetings. Honorable Kwaku Kwarteng, I am privileged to have you this evening. I hope you are doing well.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon to your viewers.
Oh yeah, I mean, of
Well,
course.
it must be good night.
Yes, yes. I almost sought to draw your attention to the time difference, but that's fine. Parliament has been accused in times past for allowing all the things that have happened to the economy happen. But Parliament has also been commended for playing ball when the need arose in the very things you had to do, including revenue measures passage. In our quest to get this IMF deal secured, in your own assessment, how have you fared?
Well, to start with, I think the point has to be made that for the country to register its 17th appearance at the IMF bailout table, if you want to add structural adjustment program and HIPIC, this will be our 19th appearance before the multilateral institutions for a bailout. It represents a collective failure on the part of all of us as a people, not just Parliament.
Oh, I see.
And for me, the important point is what we learn from this and how we proceed from here. We can always blame Parliament as an institution can never take itself out of the blame. We accept that we could have done things better. Important thing is how do we proceed from here? Now, the second point I like to make is that Ghana is going to get a program. If there is any doubt in anybody's mind that somehow we may end up without a program, let that doubt be cleared. And I say that because there were three major things that government had to do. First, government had to secure domestic debt restructuring, which according to government has been successfully done. That is a communication here in Washington, and I have no reason to doubt the minister. And then second, there was also the need for government to do its own adjustment by way of mobilizing revenue and rationalizing expenditure. That again was supposed to have been given in commitment. So you saw in the budget and even before the budget, the staff level agreement that was rigged on the back of expenditure rationalization and revenue mobilization commitments that government made. So again, the second commitment was locked in. Now we're left with the third phase where government now has to get its external creditors, and they are in the form of the bilaterals. That's where we are talking about the G20, but they are also in the form of private creditors who have invested in our economy. Now, it seems to me that Ghana has an easier task with the bilateral creditors because in all these, the IMF is just waiting for a commitment, indication that indeed we're willing to help Ghana along this path.
Okay.
I doubt that is going to be difficult to get realistically. Now, there were meetings between government and the private investors. Again, look, realistically, I just don't see how the private investors would somehow look at the situation and say we are unwilling to do anything. They would ask the usual questions. That sometimes the intention for asking those difficult questions is to ensure that once we get along and you have your program, that we will get a good deal going forward. I do not think those questions are really intended to decide whether or not they want to participate in this relief arrangement that Ghana needs in order to secure an IMF program. So I am confident that we will get a program. When are we going to get it? Is it May? Is it June? I don't even think it's very important.
Oh.
The finance minister, I heard today make the point that we're going to get this thing done by May.
Yeah.
I prefer to believe it. If it goes beyond that, we would see when next we can do it. For people like me, I have listened to the IMF MD in some of the public discussions here in Washington. and they have declared publicly that they intend to help Ghana achieve this program as soon as possible. You get a sense, as George rightly indicated, that goodwill for Ghana is big here, and that we are going to get our program. So let's lay that to rest, and let's not belabor it beyond what we have done. What is really important?
Okay.
What is really important is that we get a program, and that a program does not derail. By derail, what I mean is all these commitments that are coming, your bilateral partners are saying that we commit to help you along this path. And they are making those commitments to you because you yourself have committed in your budget to do some things. So they give a commitment. Your creditors also give commitment. These are not direct reliefs. They are indications that we are willing to move this journey with you. Now, on the back of that, the IMF is willing to give you a program. You will get a first tranche, and then you must now proceed and get the commitment that actualize the commitments that you got. So if you have China that said, I would help you, after the first payment comes, the IMF is expecting to see what exactly China would have done for you by the time the second review happens. For me, that is where the challenge really is. How we are able to set, these are commitments, and they are very easy to get. And in fact, it's one of the boxes you must tick, that you must even have a good faith engagement with your private creditors. I mean, these are very technical things. So we've had that yesterday, and that box has been ticked. I am sure that the boxes will be ticked. The real discussion that I respectfully wish we would push is, once we get that, one, we must secure those commitments. I doubt it that your external creditors, if you told them that you have deployed revenue measures, and today the Ministry of Finance was very clear in telling the creditors that, look, we have 3 revenue bills that have been passed. Yeah. We have done that, we have done that, we have done that. So the expectation is that with this, you are helping yourself, so heavens would help you. Now, how those revenue measures perform is very important. And if they don't yield the expected returns, how we rationalize expenditure accordingly in order to assure those who have put their money in our economy that we meant it when we say we're on a path of fiscal consolidation. For me, those are very, very important discussions. And the whole time that we've had the opportunity as members of parliament to engage with the ministry and also to engage with some of Ghana's stakeholders, it is a discussion about what has brought us here and whether, after getting the program, we are able to quickly correct ourselves, so that we get a successful program, so that ultimately we would not even need IMF in the future. For me, that is a more important discussion.
I get you, and we will certainly be jumping into that part of the conversation. There's a point, though, you made about the very contributions and the thinking about how do we ensure that the program does not derail. There's also a small part about your role in Parliament, because certainly oversight will be yours. If government says I was playing within this particular spectrum, your job was to be to consistently check whether they are doing so. Did you equally make commitments?
I agree.
Yes. You're saying something. Sorry, I thought you were intervening.
Yes, I was agreeing with you. You know, I don't like looking too much at where we've gone wrong, except to the extent that we use it to correct the going forward. Okay. In the past, there has been a lot of allowing, if you're on the side of government, not just for this administration, if you're on the side of government, I think the connectivity is playing. But if you are on the side of government...
No, it's fine. It's fine. I can hear you perfectly, so please proceed. Yeah.
Okay. In the past, if you're on the side of government, in Parliament, The expectation is that whatever government brings, you must help pass. If you're on the side of the opposition, your job is to oppose it. I think we need some kind of political consensus that an arrangement or a practice that has not helped us all these years and has driven Ghana to a point where we need to tell our pensioners that the money you invested with government, we are not going to be able to pay them to you as we promised. I think we don't have any choice but to review, to take stock of how we ourselves have conducted our business as Parliament, and going forward to say that we will act differently. Many of us feel very committed to that. There's no point in being partisan in Parliament and just okaying everything that government brings because you're in the same party, only for you to see your country go through some of these embarrassing experiences about begging people for forgiveness. Ghana is a very proud country. And I think what is happening now should signal to all of us as politicians that things will have to change. And Parliament, as far as we can, we will do our part. We would exert whatever influence we have in ensuring that the right thing gets done. It is also my plea to the executive that it cannot be business as usual, overspending our means and then borrowing to fill that gap. The evidence is that it has not been helpful. I don't doubt that COVID-19 and the Russian-Ukraine war have impacted us negatively. But as is the story here in Washington, when COVID came, those that had good immune systems were able to withstand it more than those whose immune systems were weak. We should learn a lesson from that and so conduct our economy that in future, even if another COVID would come, our immune system will be stronger than it was this time. That is the last point I'd like to make is also to us as citizens. It's very easy to look at political leadership and to say that they ought to have fixed things. And we hear that all the time. But look, Ghana, in terms of revenue mobilization, is a very, very tax non-compliant society. The culture of avoiding taxation is so strong that, look, as citizens, we shouldn't forget that political leaders, they come and go. Former President Rawlings, may he rest in peace. Former President Mama, may he rest in peace. They were in office, and there was the usual responses to them that, look, you have to fix the economy and you have to do things right. They are gone. We are here. And you
meant Mills, not Mahama.
Oh, did I say Mama? I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
No. I get your point, yeah.
Yeah, the late Mills. So the point I'm making is that as citizens, we should also play our role. It's not sufficient to be complaining about what political leadership has not done right. We must examine our own selves and see whether we have been very honest in the payment of our taxes. And if not, to see how we too would play our role. That is the only way we build a strong economy.
I get your point, but you said we've been avoiding tax. Mostly, the lawyers say that even though our laws take a pejorative view of tax avoidance, it might not be as criminal as people might want to be. And is the evasion that's really the problem? But you meant avoidance, right?
You call it whatever name you want. The point is that in the end, this is your country.
Okay.
If you want to play games with your country's finances, you do that. I just think that, but in the case of Ghana, it is not just tax avoidance. People evade tax, and people go to criminal extent to ensure that they don't pay their taxes. I think we should all realize that where we're going, we cannot follow this path. Review our ways and see what we can to improve the future.
It's this trend that you have set for the conversation that I shall follow after the break that we are pursuing. So after the break, with my guest will have a bite of what's been. The Never Again conversation will be had on tonight's edition of PM Business. You're welcome back to the business edition of PM Express. And tonight we've been trying to figure out and put a reality check on the fresh timelines we are being given about our IMF deal. Let's not get it wrong. The entire nation is waiting with bated breath, waiting for that period where Ghana gets this IMF deal and gets to weather the storm it's currently having. And I'm in studio with that distinguished professor from the University of Ghana Business School, Professor Lord Mensah. Also joining us is the chairman of the Finance Committee in Parliament, the former deputy minister in the Finance Ministry himself, and our finance don in this enterprise. That is George Duafe. He's also in Washington with Mr. Kwaku having to gauge what's happening on the ground. George, I know you have to leave us because the finance minister has a press conference coming up, but in the next few hours, next few minutes, what's the man likely to talk about?
Well, basically, it has to do with getting us an update on the various engagement that has been done. Apart from the investor engagement that you and I were privy to, there are other engagement that has happened that we are not privy to. And I believe the one critical question everybody wants to ask is that what has China been telling him in the commitment that they've gotten from China? And this other issues that came up in the investor engagement as well, whether there could be a possible second round of debt restructuring, this IVP debt issues and all the rest. I think that this engagement should put to rest some of these clarity issues. And again, what is the IMF telling him when they can approve Ghana's program? I think these are some critical questions, but as we can get from the minister. In terms of what next, it appears that negotiations are progressing quite well, and let's see what will happen in the next few days in our quest to get a program from the IMF.
Fantastic, Joe. We appreciate your updates on this particular one. Certainly, we'll be hearing more from you. So George will not be sleeping. By 6 a.m. in the morning, he will join us more with some updates on what's happening out there in Washington, and that's basically why he is there, giving us updates from the spring meeting where the finance minister has been very busy talking about this country's economy, meeting investors, be it of the Chinese stock or of the other Western societies, and the Paris Club. We're also helping out with some conversations. But as we've been talking about, the belief from the minister's point of view is that May is a very optimistic period. As to whether the current meetings is what is going to change that, we do not know. Now, we are projecting that a second quarter target, is it still possible? Is it the most feasible option that's on the table? But we had that conversation early on. Prof is with me. I also have a man that mostly is very difficult to get, so let me squeeze some more information out of him. The chairman of the Finance Committee in Ghana's Parliament. Mr. Kwaku, we took the break on the leg of never again being the way forward. And you started that conversation that going into the future, it cannot be business as usual. Those of you in Parliament are not going to be rubber stamps. You just approve everything that gets to your table. Governance would have to be a bit different. And the people of this republic will have to be more task compliant. I think those are the things you said prior to we going on break. Now, I need you to bring it home for me, because it's important that beyond the talk, there's a lot more commitment. People are insisting you politicians should come to the table and agree a formula which will make the never again a permanent creed in this country. Is it a realistic demand on you?
It is a legitimate demand. And I think, as I've already indicated, we in political leadership, we must lead by example. It is not, they're never going to be able to do the kind of expenditure reforms that are needed, because those that are needed without leading by example. And I say that because those reforms would mean that you need to cut public expenditure. The money that you do not have and yet you're borrowing just to provide goods and services, and your debt keeps going up. If you want to stop those things, the citizenry are going to resist unless you can demonstrate that we are in this together. And I think it is the first thing we in political leadership must do. We must lead by example. And then once we are able to communicate that, look, we have come to a point where we need to change the way we do things. So we are doing what we can as leaders. then we have the moral authority and courage to go out there and enforce it on those who will not be compliant. And I have always said that people who persistently evade tax are criminals and they ought to be treated as such. But when political leadership, we ourselves have faults and we have not addressed them, it becomes a lot more difficult to go after people. So what I would say is that let's, as a country, look, I have not been that excited in Washington. When I see there are many other countries here, and I see my own people here talking to investors, and we are pleading for and making commitments that we will do things well. Ghana, as I indicated, is a proud country. We should never be here again. And we should begin to push that national discussion, first among us politicians. There should be political consensus about the things we will do politics with and the things we cannot do politics with.
Okay.
The current difficulties going on in the economy, for instance, I believe, are the end result of decades of, in my view, every year we overspend our means and then we borrow money to pay off that over expenditure. Then the following year, we still overspend. So we borrow a lot more because we need to finance the current over expenditures and we also need to pay the debt. So then we need to, again, borrow more and more and more. And that's how we've been running this country since independence. I mean, how are you going to, as a country, how can anybody say to me that we are building a bright future for our kids when we continue to do that? So there ought to be realization that things have to be done differently. And so long as, in my view, political leadership articulates this, you're not going to get everybody on board. Even in politics, you're not going to get everybody on board. But if we have sufficient of our numbers to push for this kind of change, you're going to get sufficient numbers in the citizenry to support you. And then gradually we will begin to make progress as we have more money and we can invest more in revenue mobilization infrastructure, then people will be more compliant. We cannot do it overnight, but we must start somewhere and progress and have confidence by the time we are on our deathbeds that the future will be better than we met it. I feel very strongly about these matters, and I just hope that as a country, you, the media included, we reduce the politics a bit, sometimes letting especially the current government look bad as though a problem that we know has surfaced and has been there for decades, economic fundamentals weak for decades. When we let it look like it is the current administration that is responsible for all the mess, then people get defensive, and in the end, we don't solve the problems. Let's accept that the way we have run this country since independence have been improper, and therefore it's not a problem with the previous administration or is this administration. It's we as a people who have done things wrong, and going forward, we will change course and do things right. Maybe that kind of conversation will rally us more together and help us correct the wrongs that we have committed in the past.
Prof, do you agree? I'll come back to you, but just briefly, Prof, do you agree?
I do. I mean, it's more sounding like a statement, which I'm happy. Yeah, it's a campaign that we have to embark on. We need to appreciate.
Is it feasible? Because politicians always make promises.
Yeah, they are the leaders, and I always talk about how we finance some of our, political activities and how they build up into some of these decisions. And anytime budget is being read and there's a huge deficit, I see the business within the huge deficit, because that is when we can have, the possibility of going to borrow and then bringing the money. In the end, the money comes in, it creates economic activities. That is our thinking. But at the end of the day, do we get any benefit from that borrowing? We've been going out there borrowing every time, but how do we, account for that borrowing? Okay. That's very, very important. And for me, I think we need to appreciate the build-up of our expenditure, and that's what he's been talking about. We realized it when, at the point where we had this IMF program, somewhere around, 2016 thereabout.
Yeah, 15.
Our budget deficit was more or less penetrating 6% to GDP. And IMF gave us 5%, so which was, ideal. In the end, when we finished, we exited IMF somewhere 2019 thereabout. April. We jumped our deficit to, 11%. And that is when we started building up. From there on, we never went below 10% to our GDP.
That's when you had even proposed that we should be careful.
We should be careful the trajectory that, we're going. So for me, if we have realized this, and I'm happy it's coming from the chairman of the Finance Committee in Parliament, I think it's a good cause. And probably in Parliament, we may provide some training for them, some of them to appreciate some of the financial agreements.
So they can play their role properly.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so they don't abandon those roles.
Yes, very, very important.
And they use partisanship to actually cloud it in ways that are unreasonable.
Exactly.
Now, my final words before we go, I'm told that my time is almost up. Mr. Akwatin, I'm taking your final words on this particular matter. There is, however, an outstanding question that you should add to your final words in your answer. There are those who are saying the clearest way government can show that it wants to actually move in a different direction is to start by cutting back, showing real evidence of cutting back, be it ministers, be it expenditure, be it even capital expenditure. It should show that we want to cut back now. Is that expectation also realistic?
I agree that where we are, and the investors are telling us a bit of that. Our creditors, some of them are telling us that. I'm saying that some of our creditors are telling us that they also need us to consider expenditure cuts. And I support that call. I think government, and I'm part of government, I think we should consider which areas of expenditure we can cut. Because, look, when we have gotten an IMF program, as I indicated earlier, we would seek to get revenue from the revenue measures that we have deployed. If not for it at all, we know that those revenue measures delayed. And when I was in the ministry, I was working with GRA in respect of the revenues. And I know that revenue measures are not revenue. So you can have the measures, whether they would come in is another matter. We will do all we can to support those measures to succeed. But where there's a shortfall, we must immediately move to cut expenditure. And unless we do that, it will be business as usual, something that many of us going forward would not support.
I am grateful to you, and I'll take your final words, Prof, before we go.
Yeah, so from where I sit, I think it's economic dynamic.
May possible?
May, I don't see it to be possible.
End of second quarter?
I'm looking at somewhere July. First half of July, we should be able to get something, because the engagement is about to start. And all this debt restriction, some of the countries don't even have any framework that guides them. China, for instance, hasn't got. And the Eurobond market, they don't even have any framework when it comes to sovereign debt restructuring. So they're also now going to develop, and for the two parties, I'm talking about Ghana and the creditors, to come on terms with the framework, the target that is going to be set, whether they should be able to achieve a debt restructuring of about 80% or debt restructuring of about 50%. All these things has to be done, over the period. And also, looking at the happenings on the grounds, we need a new budget that is supposed to reflect exactly what is happening on the grounds when it comes to revenue generation and all those. The budget that we read for this year, which was 2023 budget, I see the numbers not to be, realistic. And so we need a budget that will reflect the happenings on the ground. I believe execution of that budget is facing problems as we speak now.
Now, I am grateful to you for coming in studio, and I'm also grateful to you for your insightful thoughts on this show. And folks, that's where we're in today's edition of the business edition of PM Express. The Honorable Kwaku Kwate, I'm also grateful to you for joining us from Washington. And George gave us the updates and the current, we are told pretty soon, or it's currently happening, right? There's a finance minister of the Republic of Ghana, another press briefing that the public ought to know about. In the subsequent days, we'll be giving you all the updates here. This is where you get the best. Many thanks to you for watching this day's edition.